I know where you're going with this. We've had this conversation, many times. I
Yeah.
actually would like to flip this one back to you, Jacob, because I think on the you do a much better job at articulating this specifically on the email and SMS side. I know we've had conversations about that before in terms of like how you should think about that channel. So I would love to flip it back to you on that one, but specifically on the email side, because I think you
Yeah.
you articulate it a lot better than I do.
No,
And I'm
for
happy to take the ad side, but yeah, you have a good perspective on that.
for sure. I mean, I guess on the email side, like brands should think about what is the added value, the incremental value of them owning this channel internally versus having an agency manage it. And I think there's a lot of reasons why owning this in-house doesn't make sense 99% of the time. I'm not going to say all the time, but 99% of the time. Number one is the cost. The cost to actually bring on someone who knows this channel and can manage this channel as well as it needs to be managed as an eight-figure brand is it's a multi six-figure cost. And I'll break down why. An agency typically servicing email and SMS and any sort of like call it retention ecosystem plus, etc. There needs to be someone who is a true specialist in the strategic and implementation piece. There also needs to be someone who has a deep understanding and ability to execute creative in the context of that. The probability of finding someone who is compensated less than six figures and can do both is close to none, because that person in this market would be incredibly valuable. And we've spoken to hundreds, if not thousands, of candidates over the years. I can tell you that we have found no one who has equal levels of competency in both those domains. They may exist, but it is an incredibly high cost. So you're most likely not hiring one, but two people to execute this well. The second point is volume. If you're bringing on that OpEx load, you're now committing to a six-figure annual cost, and you're now managing every single process internally that's required to execute against the minimum sort of like, let's say, volume required in that account to execute the strategy that's being implemented. And frankly, that just takes a lot of internal process going really, really right. And frankly, that just requires thousands of reps and just hours in platform, which almost nobody can deliver except an agency because of how widespread their, let's say, involvement has been over years or decades of doing something like this. So the cost is one thing. The sheer operational complexity associated with it is another. Now, this is not to say that like a brand couldn't do it. Like you absolutely could. But the third point is why? Why should a brand do this in-house? Where, and it goes back to that incremental value. Like, where is the incremental value of having all of that be done internally, managed, owned by like the founder or one of the chief operators? Like, it starts to make a lot less sense when you put together the cost, then the time cost, which is going to be guaranteed well into the mid six figures once you take into consideration your time or your team's time operationally managing all of that piece. And still, you're going to have this like sort of tunnel visioned problem where you don't see outside of the ecosystem and you're not as closely plugged into how you can leverage the best and the most recent strategies in your account. So even though you're putting in like this massive, massive premium to have this done in-house and fully owned, you still miss out on like one of the biggest value adds that we've already touched on from an agency, which is the fact that you bring and operationalize hundreds of different examples and how to best leverage those at this point in time, as well as all the landmines to avoid along the way for brands that made mistakes that before you that you either advised against or you sort of saw play out, or maybe you inherited as a byproduct of coming in as the agency, for example, that's taking over a poorly managed account. And all of that compounds, and it compounds exponentially. So the value that an agency can bring, it's in specifically email, it is massive. And it's at a fraction of the cost. So you're not talking even about a six-figure OpEx load at that point. You can cut that by like 3-4x and get an amazing value return. And again, have multiple people dedicated to you doing this for you. So there's almost no rational reason, like I said, for this to be in-housed. I could be wrong. Again, there's maybe a 1% of the time where it makes a lot of sense. I think you should still have someone in-house who understands email, who has that competency, who can speak to it as a channel holistically. But I don't think for most brands, especially in the low to kind of like mid 8 figures, does it make any sense to in-house email. That's my take.
Yeah, no, that's why I flipped it back to you. I don't have anything to add there. I think it was perfectly well said.